Hello, I'm Shayan, and this is my sensation and perception presentation regarding the temporal lobe, which is the favorite part of my brain. So, what is the temporal lobe? As you can clearly see, the temporal lobe is located beneath the temples on both sides of the brain, which is why it's called the temporal lobe. It's actually called the temporal lobe because of its proximity to the temple. It's one of the four major lobes crucial for processing sensory input and forming new memories. Its deep connection with the limbic system profoundly influences our emotions and motivation. So, as usual, you'll have the frontal lobe, you have the occipital lobe, you have the parietal lobe, and then you have the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe is essentially crucial for visual memories. It plays a role in pain and autonomic reactions such as hunger and thirst as well. And as you can see, these are the substructures of the temporal lobe, which we'll be delving into later. So the key functions of the temporal lobe include auditory processing, such as processing sounds, enabling hearing and speech perception, language comprehension, which is the Wernicke's area, which helps us understand spoken and written language, visual recognition, which helps us recognize complex objects like faces and scenes, memory formation, which the substructures hippocampus and medial structures play a more prominent role into that one, but they help us store long-term memories. So the temporal lobe substructures involve the limbic system, which consists of the amygdala in that regard, Wernicke's area, auditory cortex. It doesn't literally consist of the amygdala, but it's more so that amygdala plays a role in the limbic system. Just wanted to clarify that. The auditory cortex, the superior temporal uros, the middle temporal uros, and the inferior temporal uros. So the hippocampus and the amygdala are essentially the memory and emotion centers that are located within the temporal lobe, which is also very interesting because there is a very popular theory regarding emotions and memory that ties into this, which I believe is a very interesting area of research, which is called the flashbulb theory. And it essentially states that very vividly strong emotional memories are easier to recall when you're in a similar emotional state. I just wanted to point that out. I just find that really interesting. Then you have the key structures of the temporal lobe, which is the superior temporal uros, which is responsible for auditory information processing, speech comprehension, and music perception. The middle temporal uros, which is primarily centered on language processing, semantic memory, and the integration of multisensory information. And the inferior temporal uros, which is primarily responsible for the identification of faces, places, colors, numbers, and words. So the primary auditory cortex directly receives sound signals from the ears. Secondary areas then interpret speech, pitch, and melody. And if you're curious about what the 42 and 41 are in this part of the brain, it's essentially the Brodmann's area, which dictates what is the location of that substructure. It's essentially easier to categorize them into subsets of areas like that. And the left temporal lobe specializes in understanding language sounds. Now, the reason why the left and the right are mentioned because the temporal lobe spans between the left and the right hemisphere, and therefore they're going to be present in both the left and the right sides of the brain. That's why they are referred to as often a pair of lobes as opposed to like an individual lobe itself. Then you have the right side, which is primarily processing music and nonverbal auditory cues. Then the hippocampus is indispensable for forming new long-term memories, including new episodic and semantic recollections. And as you can clearly see, these are the functions of the hippocampus, which is form new memories, build mental maps for navigation, transform information to long-term storage, connects memory with emotions, which connects back to the flashbulb theory, and transferring information to long-term storage would also connect back to the multi-store models of memory and models of memory in general, and create social maps to help navigate interactions. Then you have the Wernicke's area. The Wernicke's area often works in conjunction with the Broca's area. The Broca's area is in charge of speech production, while the Wernicke's area is in charge of understanding speech. The reason why Broca's area is not mentioned here is because Broca's area is part of the frontal lobe. It's pretty close here on the back end of the frontal lobe. I would say it would be right about here, but it is the frontal lobe. So, damage to the specific area results in Wernicke's aphasia, which is characterized by fluent but often meaningless speech, which makes sense considering Broca's area is in charge of the speech production. And if Broca's area is not damaged, well, your speech will still be fluent, it'll be meaningless because you don't understand what you're saying exactly. Then you have other substructures which also play a massive role, like the fusiform uros, which is specialized for recognizing faces, the parahippocampal urus, which is playing a vital role in scene and spatial recognition, and the integrated perception that the general temporal lobe plays a role in. Then you have emotional and behavioral roles. So this is the amygdala, which is nestled within the temporal lobe, which is actively regulating fear, anxiety, and emotional memory. Lesions in the temporal lobe can lead to personality changes because of this reason, or aggression, or altered social behaviors. And it also significantly contributes to our overall social cognition, which, if you go back into this part of the presentation, you can see that the temporal lobe plays a massive role in a person navigating their social world. And these are the personal reasons why I love the temporal lobe. It's because it's a sensory and memory powerhouse. It profoundly shapes how we hear, remember, and understand the world. It's a seamless system. It is extremely complicated. I love the sheer amount of nuances there in the temporal lobe. And I love how it's able to inextricably link sound, sight, language, and emotion. And it literally shapes us. It shapes the way we perceive the world. It shapes how our senses connect to each other and our perception of stories and emotion. And it individualizes us way more than we thought it would. And these are the reasons why I love temporal lobe as a whole the most. I think it's a wonderful organ, and that is my presentation. Thank you.